images that stay with us in the story of Noah and the flood are the proof of how profoundly we need to rethink how we teach our religious narratives. Here is the proof, which requires a penetrating self-honesty. As you heard me say the words Noah and the flood, what images came to mind? Did the images have anything to do with us living a better life, overcoming adversity? How about treating ourselves and others better tomorrow than we did yesterday? Shabbat Shalom. Welcome, Bruchim Aba'im. I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi. You found Beit Virtuali, and let's stir up a little Torah together. Now, going a little deeper into our Noah exploration, if none of the honest images that came to our mind derived from the symbolic and archetypal underpinnings of the Noah story, then were the more literal images that came the result of a more recent intense Torah study in the text as it's written, or from the memories of a picture book that was placed in front of us when we were 3, or perhaps the skit in religious school where we dressed up as our favorite animal when we were 6. I know that it is possible for this all to sound insulting, but it is not meant to be. It is, however, meant to be jarring. As an adult, the Noah story, when taken literally, insults our intelligence, and can be one of the many sorts of silly images that we have in our mind when we step away from organized religion. I'm too intelligent for these juvenile stories. But if our honest assessment of the first images that popped into our mind most closely lead us to the pages of a picture book, then we're not rejecting Torah. We are simply rejecting the picture book and renaming that Torah. I'm not so sure how fair that is to the complexity of Torah, how much more so Judaism itself. And if any of us are feeling any level of discomfort in this moment, notice as well how hard it is to admit when any of our rejections are based on such things. It is so hard to admit, and even harder to want to change. As human beings, these moments of discomfort tend to lead us to moments of doubling down. It is cognitive dissonance, but there is a very logical and rational reason why we are here. The problem in religious education is the purpose of these skits and picture books is not to present a gateway into the delicious complexity of Torah and Jewish thought, but rather to engage age appropriately with the narrative of Judaism. The goal at age 3 is not to build a Torah scholar. Okay, I've known some families where that is the goal, but the general goal at age 3 is to place the self-image of the child into the narrative. Early childhood education is not my specialty, so I will humbly bow out and let the many amazing religious school teachers out there do their job. But around the age of 10, something extraordinary happens to our children that I am not going to step away from. These maturing youth develop the ability to think symbolically and then begin asking the magnificent questions that terrify way too many adults. Did Noah really exist? How did they feed all those animals? And yes, one clever future Torah scholar and one present smartass is going to inquire as to the logistics of the disposal of manure. But this moment, this is the crux. This is the center. This is the liminal moment that we have lost. And we have lost it because when we started asking these same questions around age 10, we ourselves were directly or indirectly told to shut up. Yet it is for this point of potential transformation that the story has led to this moment. The existence of something that must be questioned causes us to do exactly what we are supposed to do. Ask the question. This is the point most poignantly able to help our tradition evolve with our brains. Our narrative can be read as children and understood in some capacity as children. It can also be read as youth, young adults, no longer quite so young adults, my age, and those blessed legacy learners that have at their disposal the wisdom of many decades. But if never challenged, all of those groups, including those with more gray than I, will still understand the story through the eyes of the child, if that childhood version has never been challenged. Yet the older we stick with that original interpretation, the greater the probability that we're going to double down when it's challenged later on in life. The interpretation that I built my ego around must be the correct one. Most children, however, can only understand God, gods, goddesses as the epitome of human power. That is, their parents. Why do you think so many religions are infused with God the Father, Mother Goddess? At those early points, we are limited by our ability to abstract, by our ability to imagine outside of our everyday visual experience. And this God is the exact same God that so many reject. And this happens when we have never been given or have given the permission to have an expansive theology and reread the texts at each of these ages with the expanding consciousness and expanding abilities that we gain as we get older. At some point after the picture books and the skits, our brains know that something is silly, and a human guide, available, willing at this moment to model dialogue and engagement, finds on the other side of that series of questions and dialogues and debates that a youth is able to begin disconnecting from the centrality of that picture book. And then, like all relationships, their relationship evolves. They're able to move past cartoon silliness and start asking questions or engaging with questions such as, what does a flood symbolize? Why were there 2 of some animals and 7 pairs of others? What is it like when we're in a group of 2 versus a group of 14? What does it mean to build something? What does it mean to destroy something? Where else in our tradition does rain appear? Where else does the number 40 appear? What about the numbers 2 and 7? Do the existence of these numbers in the narrative have any meaning beyond the numbers themselves? Having asked these questions and been asked these questions in children and youth that have allowed and been allowed to have an expansive theology, youth are hungry for this type of engagement. And so are we. So the first question that comes from this, then, our iterative question that we can repeat every single year is, what childhood images in our tradition have we carried forward until today? What images have we locked in stone and not allowed to become greater than they are, or allowed ourselves to see them as anything other than that earliest memory? If we did not have that modeling of thought and dialogue at the moment that we began asking these questions, it is possible that our entire view of Torah and Judaism has been infused with these straw men that have little relationship to the thousands of years of evolved and elevated dialogue that come through Jewish thought. If we're going to reject Judaism and religion as silly, it's the 21st century, we are more than welcome to do so. Society has now given us the freedom to do so. But it is worth taking a moment each year as we cross paths with Noah, with this story, and evaluate how many picture books or Hollywood movies remain at the center of the excuses that we use to discard all of our religion. Then we are free to engage with these images as adults, along with the creative and intelligent adults that originally wrote these stories, that engaged in divine revelation, divine inspiration, editing, understanding that humans are humans, and those amazing sages and prophets of our past had the ability also to engage in symbol and archetype. Shifting now quite radically. Our second question actually comes from asking these questions at a metaphorical or a symbolic level. And they really do start making sense for which of us has not felt on the receiving end of a deluge that seemed to come from heaven and wash away the life that we once knew. This can actually, in the wake of a natural disaster, be quite literal, but we can as well experience the full force of this flood in the loss of a loved one, an unexpected termination of employment, a collapse of a relationship, even the failure of what was once a sure belief from inside a rigid ideology. The more that the flood of destruction and forced change washes away the old, the more desperate we are to hold on to something that gives anchor to a life we recognize. The Noah narrative sees Noah loading the ark with 2 of every kind of animal, except for the kosher ones, which get a bulk rate. The ark is the symbol of the human attempt to carry something of the old into the new. And what is carried is a mixture of that which might repopulate the new life we build around ourselves with something familiar from the old, along with the things that we require for personal use. This is not entirely different from what it's like to make those decisions, those hard this stays, this goes decisions as we're about to make a long move with limited space and resources. Decisions must be made, and those decisions will be based on comfort and the fear of letting go, while others will be needed to get through what we hope will be the new life that emerges when we get to the other side. At the most basic allegorical level, the level where we take the Torah from its past context and pull it into our present, demanding that it has relevance today. Well, the comparison then is most directly made by being forced to move because something tragic has happened to us. In this case, the ark might not be the moving company for the geographical life change as much as the psychological journey that we are forced to make when, God forbid, we lose a child. In that, there was our old world on this side, and then the deluge of whatever brought to us the horror of this unspeakable moment. And then if we choose to, as not all people do or are able to do so, over here the choice to start living again, the promise of the rainbow. The ark is a sort of psychic cocoon that we build around ourselves in order to survive. And it is built from and filled by the scraps of the parts of our previous selves that we salvage and finally emerge into a world that is no longer familiar or comfortable to us. Even personal traumas that might seem slightly less horrific than this contain the exact same truths regarding our processes that get us from the previously known to that now unknown, even if the details and the nature of the journey differ. In the Noah story, the Eternal commands Noah to build an ark in preparation for a planned deluge, a planned destruction, a planned loss. Sometimes our personal flood has no warning, but other times, many of us have sat at the bedside of someone in hospice. And in this case, we try to build our ark by making sure that every brother and sister and friend and close relative comes from the four corners of the earth to be a part of that preparation. Survival in the Noah narrative comes from obeying the divine voice, riding out the deluge of endless waves and endless waiting, and then finally reemerging only after that waiting has also left us with a sense of hopelessness. Water never recedes as fast as we want or need. And then sadly, even as hope does return in the symbol of the dove and the symbol of the rainbow, the narrative reminds us of human frailty and brokenness in the narrative and the actions of Noah's daughters. How different is this from us? We don't have a literal divine voice, but many of our personal disasters do have warnings that we ignore. And we ignore them from an overpowering urge for our now, no matter how bad it might be, because it's known to last one more day. Then when the deluge begins, it feels like it will never end. And when we reach the other side, the act of overcoming itself may delude us into ignoring that we are still humans now, as capable as hurting others now as we once were. Having experienced transformation does not make us immune from ourselves. The promise of the Eternal in the Noah narrative is that the world will never again be destroyed by flood, not the world will never again be destroyed. Likewise, hard-earned wisdom in one area does not nullify the lessons we still have to learn in all of our other areas of life. We may have overcome one predilection, but we still always have something more to learn. This parallel narrative has the potential for unlimited questions to which we can return every year. Certainly, for example, the obvious question of what are the warnings that we're getting from the voice of the Eternal that we are choosing to ignore, and the deluge is right there, ready to come. That's worth exploring, but for the second question, I really want to give honor to those picture books and those religious school skits, as I as well sometimes think back to those comforting, silly cartoon pictures of the animals going on 2 by 2. But I want to ask us to consider if after our hardest lessons, if we have carried something from the past into the present that we no longer need. Did we stick something on the ark that wasn't necessary, or even worse, is destructive? One example might be, maybe we've brought a destructive friendship with us from our past, and we just can't let go of it out of, well, perhaps a righteous sense of loyalty, but maybe it's because we don't want to give up the youth that that relationship represents, the last remnants of that part of me that I just don't want to admit I am not anymore. And we know that that should not have been put on the ark when being around that person, we are the worst versions of ourselves. But maybe the baggage we've brought with us is much more subtle, such as the need to always be right, the need to dominate a room, the need to have control over all the lives around us because we're obviously so much more wise than anyone else and know what everyone should do with their lives. These things may have served us at one point as our ego formed, but what good are they doing us now on this other side of the rainbow? When I am forced to build an ark and ride out the storm, what am I taking with me? That ever-present smartass inside wishes to add, if what I'm taking with me is BS, have I also brought along enough shovels? Shabbat shalom, everyone. We'll see you next time.